Keep in mind that once you hit 65 years old, that doesn't mean that you're done investing and saving for retirement. If you live to be 90 years old, that's another 25 years of saving, investing, and growth that you would have. So let's take a look at a spreadsheet to dispel some myths about what's more important, the amount you save, the rate of return, or what you return in. Is it taxable or not taxable? We'll explore some of these questions together and hopefully come up with some answers, and I hope you get some value from the video. What you're looking at here is a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and the areas over here in red are the only areas that you can enter things. The purpose of the spreadsheet, is to input certain interest rate returns and certain amounts that you start with and how much you contribute each year. And then at the end of the sheet, it will project out to 40 years how much money you would have approximately if you were to stay with that. So the first column is variable. You can put any return rate over here for the variable. And then the second column here in yellow, this is inflation, an inflation adjustment that decreases the purchasing power of the money that you've saved. For example, if you have $1 million, the $1 million might only have the purchasing power of $300,000 at some point in the future. And these four columns over here are merely just so that you can have an instantaneous comparison of various different returns. So what I want to do over here is, instead of putting any kind of a return, I just want to show how much money you would have if on day one we were to, for the starting amount, I'm going to put here $1,000. There's no additional amount of money is going to be put in there. And as we can see, since there's no inflation rate put in over here and there's no return on your investment, after 40 years, you would have $1,000. But what I want to do is, we're going to take a look at certain types of investments that are bare bones minimums. If you were to invest in an ETF, SPY, which is based on the 500 companies in the S&P 500, there's actually 505. Some of the companies have preferred stock, which is also in there. And the average return on investment going back to 1957, I believe it was, that percent for the variable rate over here, what we are going to do is we're going to put in 10.5% with both the return from the S&P 500 and no other money put in there. $1,000 on day one, you put it into the S&P 500, which is basically about 2 shares, a little more than 2 shares. You would have $50,000 40 years later. And why this is significant is, if you are 25 years old and you just graduated college and you got $1,000 from your parents as a graduation present, and you put that money in there, this here $50,000 at age 65 is a $5,000 income the very next year. You can see how the very next year at age 66, it'll earn about $5,000 a year. Now, let's say that you were, I did want to take a look at the inflation really quick. So over here, the inflation purchasing power, it didn't decrease it by anything because I never put in an inflation rate. So over here, for the average inflation rate, going back to the 1960s, the inflation rate was about 2.5%. So if we go back here and we look, the purchasing power of $50,000 when you're 65 with a 2.5% averaged inflation rate over 40 years would only have the purchasing power of $20,000. So let's take that into account. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at these other columns here. If you went into mutual funds, and some of the aggressive mutual funds are 13%, but if you had a 12% return, look at how much higher this is. And this is without putting any other money in other than $1,000 on day one. And that's the power of compounded returns. So now what we're going to do is we're going to enter over here in this red area. We're going to, for the amount added each year, we're going to assume that you're 25 years old, you're doing $100 a month, which then adds $1,200 a year.
Now let's look at how much money you would have after 40 years at 10.5%. Looking over here, you would have, doing $100 a month from age 65, you would have $657,000 in your retirement account. And mind you, if you put this money in and you don't do anything silly like trying to buy it and sell it and time the markets, at the end of 40 years, that 657,000 would give you the equivalent of about a 65,000 a year retirement amount. And you would also add things like Social Security to that. But that's only if it was $100 a month. Now, what if you were starting, what if your year one, let's say that you waited until you were 35? Well, then we only come down to here on this one at 10.5% interest. If you waited until you were 35 to start, same thing with the $100 a month, you would have $235,000. Now, mind you, we're not even talking about the inflation. There'll actually be another video on how inflation erodes your retirement spending amount. So in year 30, if you start at age 35 instead of 25, after 30 years, you would only have a $23,000 a year income. If you started at 45, then you would only have this going on for 20 years of savings, you would only have about an $8,000 income. So let's go back, and now instead of, let's say that instead of $1,200 a year, let's say we were doing, after you graduate school, you're smart, if you're married, you have the two of you are saving together. Let's put in the average amount of money that a person would be spending on a car payment. And that's about $600 or $700 a month. Let's just do $500 a month. That's $6,000 a year. Now let's look at the savings from 25 years old to 65 years old. You would have over $3 million in there with a $300,000 a year income. That's how much your car payment is costing you. Now, I'm not saying you don't need a car, but there's a point at which you would absolutely want to wait before buying really expensive ticket items. So now if you were at 12% interest in a mutual fund, look at the comparison from 3 million to 4.6 million at that point. This would be taxable, by the way, long-term capital gains, which is for most people out there that are making less than $500,000 a year. This would only be taxed at 15% interest for federal. Your tax situation would be different, so of course you would want to talk to an accountant on what would be right for you. And if you were to have that magical return, if you were able to get to 15%, you would have $10 million. I actually have a friend that's been doing this with $1,000 a month. Well, $1,000 a month is $12,000 a year. And with $1,000 a month, it would be $6 million at just going in the S&P 500 with SPY. Your money's not locked up. It's just in a brokerage account. There's no penalty. You do not want to take any money out of this account. And at 12% interest, if it was inside a 403B or a 401k, you would be looking at almost $10 million, which is safe to say about $800,000 a month in retirement. Now, I didn't talk a lot about the inflation adjustment. Right now, let's say they didn't get in front of inflation and it stayed at the currently as of the making of this video, 4%. Notice how the purchasing power, even at 4%, the purchasing power of $6 million is about a third at 4%, because that 4% is reducing your 10.5% to an effective return of only 6.5%. So playing around with this, you could have a lot of insight. And although a lot of people out there can write this program for themselves, it took me a number of hours to put this together. I've posted this to my Patreon page, and it's only $3 to become a member. You can become a member using the link down in the description. You'd really be helping out my channel. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe. The number of videos that I post is going to be expanded. And I promise you that you'll see you'll hear and see information in my videos utilizing some variables that other people posting similar content did not consider, specifically how inflation changes your purchasing power. I just wanted to go leave you with one thing. So let's go back to the $1,200. So if you were doing the $100 a month, which is doable for just about everybody, and it's still 10.5% interest, just buying ticker symbol SPY in a brokerage account, as long as you don't sell, there are no taxes until you do draw the money. If we go down to the end over here, notice that it's 1/3. So next time you're pointing the finger at the Fed thinking, oh, they're raising interest rates and it's hurting the public, keep in mind, back when it was 9% interest, these numbers can start looking dismal. So if you like to play around with it, this spreadsheet's on the Patreon page.